I'm Tony Dunkley, a former UK detective and now international advisor on investigating human trafficking. Come with me as I travel across the world to find the front line of modern slavery, learning from international law enforcement and the global anti-trafficking community on their lived experiences in investigating cases, identifying suspects and rescuing survivors. Coming up in this week's episode of Let's Talk Modern Slavery.
So they're things that create a right environment for people to be vulnerable and to be exploited. In your experience in the CT world, with Al-Shabaab specifically in Somalia, what's going on there with the trafficking situation?
Somalia has one of the youngest populations in the world. Okay. Now typically, and there's a lot of vulnerable people. And what that creates is a pool of vulnerable people that can easily be exploited by Al-Shabaab. And when we refer to Al-Shabaab, we're not talking about a disorganised entity. We're talking about some organisation that are well structured, well funded, well equipped.
Terrorist organisations are recruiting children. And when I say recruiting, they're kidnapping children. What's happening is that when those children are recruited, and it happens over a period of time. It could be several years. So when they're still children, then they commit the act. And politically, that's been quite difficult to stomach, I think. Because if someone commits a terrorist act, it's difficult to call them a victim. James, thank you so much for being with me here today. As you can tell, we're sort of outdoors, wind is blowing everywhere. We're right by an airport, so the sound guy is absolutely going to destroy me for this one. What I'd like to do with my guests is let them introduce themselves, because you do a particularly unique job in a very high-risk environment. So what is it you do?
So essentially I'm the program manager for a counter-terrorism funded program here, specifically in Somalia. I've been here for the past 5 years, thereabouts, running this program in different variations, with a brief period of time with the UN. That is essentially just trying to make the environment safer for the population of Mogadishu and develop the capability and the capacity of the security forces. Yeah.
There's a long history, isn't there, of conflict and insurgency terrorism within Somalia, and that environment is very high risk and ever changing, and particularly for someone with your role and what you're trying to achieve is a hugely daunting task. I think, am I right in thinking you first came over, was it during COVID when we were talking before? Yeah. Back in 2019, so already the environment is incredibly hostile to be doing what you're doing. But then you came over during COVID, and everything that was going on with that. I mean, the world was ending, and you find yourself in Somalia, starting this incredibly tough project. How did that work? How did you end up doing it?
Yeah, essentially so rewind a little bit further back, before this program I was just finishing 15 years in the British military, where I'd focused on primarily explosive ordnance disposal, high risk search and some other niche tasks within the military. And I'd left, and it was I think it was beginning of February 2020, walking around my house, morning coffee, dressing gown on, and I received a phone call from a gent that wanted to discuss the potential of setting up an inaugural capability. Didn't know where at the time, didn't know when it would start. And after some discussions, I agreed to come out here, and I landed here on the 1st of March 2020.
March,
2 weeks later, the world seemed to come to a grinding halt.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, so 2 weeks after arriving here, COVID was really announced fully in terms of a global pandemic, and that's was the beginning of some pretty significant challenges to programs
Yeah.
across the globe.
Okay. I mean, in Somalia in particular, what were the, sort of in the UK we had restrictions there, and different countries had different restrictions. What was it like? What were the rules here at that time for COVID?
Well, still, things very early on were much unknown. Okay, so everyone was still trying to establish their protocols. Okay, there was the global advisories and the vaccination rollout, which was a problem here logistically. Everything needing to be kept cool at certain temperatures for a period of time. But the majority of the problems were seemingly on the international side of things, because we are trying to follow the international guidance. In terms of COVID here in Somalia, it really wasn't recognised early on as an issue. For example, a lot of my Somali colleagues and wider security forces really assessed the situation to be more related to malaria than COVID. But then we were trying to, impart measures on them where we could keep ourselves protected and try to protect our Somali counterparts. But trying to get social distancing implemented here with our colleagues was virtually impossible at times.
Yeah.
We had to come up with very sort of specific ways in which, or unique ways in which we could have contact with our counterparts and maintaining our safety as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, again, Somalia being what it is. I've been coming out here for a few years now, and I understand to a degree the complexities that are there. There's layer upon layer of something that creates chaos.
Yeah.
Whether it be Al-Shabaab, whether it be climate, and so on and so on. So then suddenly, the world has this COVID pandemic panic, but it's just another thing for Somalia. It's just another problem to deal with, and it's. Would you agree that it's sort of become normalised, and not the COVID situation in Somalia, but the complexities and the difficulties that Somalis have? It's just become normal.
Yeah, I mean, life here is challenging. If I take my opinion on what a challenging environment is from my upbringing, what's normal to me, and I see some of my friends and colleagues, the way they live and go about their business, it's extremely challenging, and it is a normal. They often don't see that it's challenging or what it could be. I work with some fairly young officers or members of the government, and it's all they know. So, some of them have never left Mogadishu, some of them have left Somalia. So it's what they know. But it is definitely normalised for a lot of people. Yeah.
So when you come over with your experiences, and obviously your time in the military, you brought quite a unique skill set over to this environment and applying it to try and stem the capacity, stem the flow of terrorism, recruiting for terrorism acts and so on. What skill set have you brought over here specifically that you work on, as much as you can comfortably say?
Yeah, sure. So broadly, we're trying to reduce or mitigate the risk of explosive devices. This is one of, no, let me correct myself, this is the most IED'd country globally, an IED being improvised explosive device. This is at times on a daily occurrence, we'll see these explosions taking place in the capital. So my background was in search and explosive ordnance disposal in different capacities, working in amongst teams that do that around the world in different conflict areas. So primarily that was the skill set that I was bringing to the initial program that started in 2020.
And bringing it round to the modern slavery, the human trafficking side of things, those of us that are in that space often talk about the push factors. So they're things that create a right environment for people to be vulnerable and to be exploited. In your experience in the CT world, with Al-Shabaab specifically in Somalia, what's going on there with the trafficking situation? Because about perhaps Al-Shabaab recruiting children, recruiting young men, recruiting young women, indoctrinating and to commit terrorist acts. What's your What's your experience of that? What you're hearing, what you see?
Well, I mean, it's something that I, my team, and the wider CT community, and all communities and all entities and programs need to be aware of. We're in Somalia has one of the youngest populations in the world. Okay. Now, typically, and there's a lot of vulnerable people, IDPs, just poor standards of living,
internally displaced persons. Yeah,
correct. Lots of poverty-stricken areas, mostly in the rural communities, and what that creates is a pool of vulnerable people that can easily be exploited by Al-Shabaab. And when we refer to Al-Shabaab, we're not talking about a disorganised entity. We're talking about some organisation that are well structured, well funded, well equipped. They are able to target the communities that they need to in areas where they need the recruitment to take place, and generate the influence by plan or just forced abductions. That's something that we have to be very aware of across Somalia. The areas, the environments that people live in, the lack of education, the lack of jobs for young people, the poverty, they're all factors that enable Al-Shabaab to recruit very effectively.
Yeah. Because we're hearing more and more, we're seeing a lot more, many countries, particularly those in conflict or have been for several generations, is that terrorist organisations are recruiting children. And when I say recruiting, they're kidnapping children from villages, towns, etc. And what they're doing is indoctrinating over a period of time. Mates coming over, some guys who love that. So they're coming and they're indoctrinating to a way of thinking. The belief system tails, and they should do that for those reasons. What's happening is that when those children are recruited and that happens, it happens over a period of time. It could be several years. So when they're still children, they might be 16, 17 years old, not 18, the year generally internationally we consider an adult at 18, is that then they commit the act. And politically that's been quite difficult to stomach, I think, because if someone commits a terrorist act, it's difficult to call them a victim. And we're finding these cases are popping up now on the international stage and sadly. So if we bring it all the way back to what you're doing at the front line, I assume from you're finding children, with IEDs or involved with Al-Shabaab. How do you manage that on a practical level? If you're stopping these people.
Well, back to your initial point there about the recruitment of young people and the sort of time, like how long the process is in terms of indoctrination. Yeah, you could be looking at children, as young as you can imagine, being recruited or abducted, and then being in Al-Shabaab camps or communities that are, indoctrinated over this prolonged period of time. They don't then therefore know any different, and then are used at a time where Al-Shabaab wants to use them. So they have logistics, they have facilities, they are fed, they are accommodated, they are paid for or promised payment, and then at a time of Al-Shabaab's choosing, they deploy these children in the role that they're intended. So you're right, it's not they abduct them, use them immediately. There's a timely process that's followed. And in terms of what we see on the ground or what we need to be aware of, it's very tricky because there isn't a template. When you're doing your profiling of what Al-Shabaab or a typical Al-Shabaab person looks like, there is none, and they don't typically come into the city wearing a uniform. They don't have any kind of identification that's suggesting that they're Al-Shabaab. So we need to assume that the information or intelligence that we have is accurate, verified, and complete. But if we don't have information or intelligence and we're just doing routine tasks, it becomes really difficult to identify who might be carrying out nefarious activity or not. So it's a huge issue.
Yeah. So I guess if everyone is a potential threat, then that risk assessment, that readiness, preparedness you're always on high alert.
Yeah.
because anyone could be, from a small child,
Yeah.
effectively, to an adult, to a senior citizen. You know, there's no template, like you said. There's no accurate profile.
Yeah, we have to hope that the training and development that we do with the security forces enables them to spot signs early on that would lead to further questions being asked of those individuals. You know, you're talking about people that are popping up in the city and they're actually from a completely different part of Somalia and they don't know who they're travelling with, and you know, things that might raise your awareness or your instincts and to dig deeper into who this person might be. So yes, you have to always be alert to the abnormal.
I mean, you mentioned about the frequency of explosions. You know, if we look at like a 778 or the lone wolf situation in the UK that happens relatively very infrequently, and you've got like a 9/11 in the States and so on. This is happening every day. Explosions are going off every day, if not every other day. It's a really high-risk environment to work in. Like you said, you know, there's anyone can potentially be that. Because of that, you mentioned about intelligence as well. You know, we're not going to go into any secrets here or anything like that, but you know, that relies on often community relations. Members of the community, for one reason or another, providing information that can help into their roles, law enforcement, CT work. Have you found that that's been a difficult process, or what has that process been like for an international to come in to work with, either directly or indirectly, the community in which you hadn't had experience of before? How's that been developed?
Hi, this is Tony from Illustro and host of the Let's Talk Modern Slavery podcast. Illustro Consultancy provides international training, investigation, research support and educational services to criminal justice practitioners, private industries, students and the wider public in general on preventing, identifying and dealing with modern slavery and wider human rights violations. I wanted to take a moment to tell you about our new workshop for businesses. Our Modern Slavery and Supply Chain workshop is designed for businesses to understand what modern slavery is, how to identify it, and how to practically reduce its presence within your own business and supply chains. The workshop is bespoke in nature and tailored to our clients' needs. However, our trainees have typically included board members, global supply chain and procurement managers, human resources, corporate law, CSR managers, and sustainability managers. The workshop takes place over 2 full days and builds knowledge and practical skills step by step. Trainees learn through visual aids, written exercises, case studies, reflection, live scenarios, and directed open source internet-based research on key reports and databases. So if you'd like to learn more about our in-person or remotely delivered workshops, then visit us at www.illustroconsultancy.co.uk and download our brochure. At Illustro Consultancy, we know the business of modern slavery, but more than that, we understand how to deliver training to businesses that can prevent it. Stay safe.
We needed to identify very early on that there's many security forces here that are always on the offensive, they're always on the front foot, they always have a very aggressive stance, it's very authoritarian, and what that can do is disengage the security forces from the community because people are scared. The security forces aren't always active in the manner. There's all kinds of levels of corruption and extortion, things that go on here. But we identified that a softer approach was really key, and joining up our unit with the local police community, the local police stations is really important. And having a softer approach whereby we engage with families or locals and ask them how they're doing. Not me personally, obviously, of course, our Somali partners, but just trying to build this reputation over a period of time as a friendly call sign that they can communicate with, which then opens up the door for that two-way information sharing. And we also recognise that one issue that we were facing is the lack of women in security forces as well, and that was one of the key aspects that we focused on, is having a women or a proportion of our unit that was made up of women officers, because that again opens up the demographic of the communities that are willing to talk, whether it be other women and children that would be able to give us any kind of information.
I guess on a practical level as well, if you're searching females, probably a female to search a female, and these kind of things that would be seen by the community, and they go, they're considering this. Yeah, they're respectful there. Yeah,
absolutely. There's a framework in place that we need to, and the police need to uphold, as do the military and all other security agencies and entities that are working here. And of course, your example is exactly right about women searching women, men searching men, and also following the cultural dynamics that go with that as well, because situations where that isn't followed can flare up very easily here.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the culture as well, and not necessarily the culture of Somalis, but an organisation culture. You get that in the police, in the counter-terrorism world, and so there's always an organisational culture. Have you found you've influenced in a positive way or negative the organisational culture of the law enforcement CT officers that you work with here? Have they seen, appreciated, and do you think will continue to use those practices when, I assume, eventually your organisation will come away? Do you think there's a sustainability in that? Is that in the planning?
I'd like to. It's definitely in the planning. It's definitely part of our sustainment model and our approach. I believe, on the most part, it's not an abnormal theory for our officers. Anyway, searching of men on men and women on women, it's not abnormal. It's just reinforcing the need to be consistent with that and follow the guidelines and follow the police law. So yeah, I believe overall it will be followed. Of course, there's challenges. There's some people that buy into this more than others. This isn't like anywhere most people could imagine. It's very problematic. Yeah, on the most part, there's these kind of things will be.
Well, that's it. I mean, what you're saying there resonates with me as well. When I do the trainings, you always hope that at least a couple will take it on board, go away and apply those skills, and then if you're not there, so if you're in a mentoring role, you're there regularly doing it, those habits or those practices will become habits, and when you step away, they carry on. Sometimes I wonder if they do.
That's it.
Well, I hope they do.
It's habits. Yeah. It's building habits. It's building positive habits. It's building the habits that you want. And yes, in our mentoring roles with our officers, the way that we conduct ourselves, even in our mentoring teaching, is really important, because they look up to teachers. They call them Malin, the teacher. Okay? They have a lot of respect for teachers and those that can impart knowledge onto them. So the way that we conduct ourselves is really important for them, and it's over time those habits become the norm.
Yeah, and I think you again resonates, because sometimes people think about policing skills, investigation, these kind of things, but actually the softer skills are so important for police and your roles and others that you train. Just to be able, the ability to talk to someone respectfully, and to keep a calm level, and to these kind of things that develop rapport and trust are so essential for policing, particularly in an environment like this, where often people are not reluctant to talk to police like they might be in the UK, because they might not like police or something. It's that they fear talking to police because of the consequences of what can happen to them, their family, and so on. It's a different dynamic. It's so important.
My experience in Somalia generally with the security forces and civilians is that Somalis love to talk. Stories on stories on stories, and it's fantastic. In the unit that I work with, we have storytellers. It's fantastic because you hear all kinds of weird and wonderful things. The areas here, and if we can put some context on this, for the audience about what we're looking at when we talk about the police or military, there's a huge proportion of the officers that can't read or write.
And that'd be so surprising for people to, think of a police force. can't read.
We'll have notepads, we'll have pens, but often they don't know how to use them. That's changing more. There's government initiatives that are working on the education system, and that will change, in like time to come. But yeah, like the actual view on this is that there are a lot of officers that can't read and write, so they are highly reliant on their verbal communication skills.
Yeah. Just going back to originally when you went into the military, at that point, you would have had a large support structure around you. Have you found that coming out of the military and then working in a different organisation, or certainly smaller one, a very tight team, but that team is dynamic, it changes, and you help build a team, but then it breaks up. And I'm just sort of looking at, particularly around the support mechanisms that you would have had in the military. And here, I assume you're more or less on your own, unless there's something I'm aware of. How do you deal with this? How was it dealt with the stresses in the military? And how would you compare that to how you manage that now without that, internal, organised, formalised support network? How do you do that?
Well, I won't beat around the bush. So, an awful lot happened the first day I ever travelled out into Mogadishu.
Right.
Okay. It is a steep curve. Like, for anybody that hasn't worked in relative isolation in a hostile environment, it's a steep curve. From having what we call the big green machine behind you, somebody to come and get you, just if anything goes wrong. It takes an awful lot of planning. It takes an awful lot of consideration about the actions you're going to take, what actions you will do if any eventuality happens. And it's high stress. The work isn't for everybody. Experience helps. You've got the known knowns, the unknown knowns. All of that going on, and the unknown unknowns, which are the real ones to worry about, right? But yeah, working in this environment takes an awful lot of consideration, lots of measured risk, having plans in place if things do go wrong, and having a well-gelled team that know exactly what to do when or if something does go wrong.
So what do you do on those tough days? How do you deal with that personally, mentally?
When we come back in for a tough day, is that what you mean? There've been many tough days. I've had tough days, I'd say, end of 2022, large double vehicle-borne IED attack at the Ministry of Education. Several of my colleagues were injured and killed. Hundreds of other people died in that attack. October 29th, 2022. Talking helps, having a team around you helps, being very self-aware, not trying to keep things internal to yourself. I guess my military experience and operation in Afghanistan has helped with that as well, working in these high stressful environments, seeing and hearing and feeling the effects of seriousness. So yeah, communication for me is key, making sure that my team are talking, looking out for signs of people becoming more isolated, not wanting to discuss what's going on. That's one example of things. Then I guess, being out in a city, you're inevitably going to see or feel the effects of things that's happened, whether you're seeing extreme poverty at the side of the road, or seeing a significant event, whether it be shooting or explosion take place. That's a photograph in your mind, it's a memory that you have, and you have to process, you have to go through a full process of communicating your thoughts, your feelings, and just really being very self-aware.
Do you, I know you've got your military family, military friends kind of thing. When you circulate back out, so come in for a period of time here, you'll go out. do you find that you're coming from two extreme environments, aren't you? You're going to one that's very intense, high risk, daily threat to life, and then you're circling out to, let's say, England. We won't go into where exactly, but say you're going to England, and there you can walk the streets and you can walk into a shop and buy a packet of crisps, a meal deal, without looking over your shoulder, without being on high alert. What's that transition like? How is that managed? Because I assume it's similar-ish to me. When I come out of these environments, it takes me a good week. It takes me a good week to settle down. I don't know if what's your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. It has changed somewhat over the 5 years. It's still some of the same common themes happen. Yes, I'm here for months at a time, or in the region for months at a time, and then I go back to the UK, and you can drive down the road in relative uniformity and not expect something significant to take place, or 9 times out of 10 not take place. It does take a period of time for you to be able to decompress. But that's really important, just to recognise that you need that decompression time as well. It's that awareness of it. I've been through periods of time where I felt almost like a bit of an alien in the early days, because you can't. There's certain things you don't and you can't talk about, but the things that you can talk about are still from a seemingly completely different world to what people can comprehend back home. And like if you talk to your mother or your father or your brother, your sister or your friends, if they haven't got a comprehension of what life may be like elsewhere in the world in a conflict zone, they really can't grasp it, and that can make you feel somewhat isolated. So I'm very fortunate that I do have people around me that can understand and listen, and often that's what it just requires, listening. It doesn't have to be two-way, just get something, soundboard your mind off people. But yeah, there can be an alienating feeling there.
For example, so when I was in Mogadishu, we had an attack, water attack, and gunfire was coming down, and we were running between cargoes to get to the bunker. Anyway, we got there. Security guard was shot, but everyone else was okay. Got into the bunker, and you could see, obviously, there's a lot of people staying in that particular area. The people of different ethnicities, different races, different religions. And my Somali colleagues, they were clearly very visibly upset. And what united them in their grief, or should I say united them in their way of dealing with that grief and that fear at the time, was through prayer. So they came together, they started to pray, and then other Somalis were joining them in this bunker. And you had other people that were very distressed, hyperventilating, that kind of experience, and a mixture of the extremes and everything in between. And I dealt with it my sort of normal way of making a joke and humour. It's just the way I deal with things. But what was so important, bring it back to why I'm talking about this, is something you touched on about the team ethos, and those that have experienced something that you have experienced. You've been there together, you've experienced it together. And so after, when we got the all clear came out, it was so important we made sure that we got the team together. We went through each and their experience. Because when things like that go on, everyone has their own experience in that, doesn't it? It's chaos. And how they deal with it. It's really important to talk about it, but talk about it to the right people.
Yeah, that's it. That's a key point as well. And I'm very fortunate. I do have a team, and we do talk, and we make a point of talking about it. And there's often no barriers, but just to develop on your point there, we also have a responsibility for who we share information and to what level as well. So what I mean by that is, we might recognise that we need to talk about things, but we also need to be mindful of who we actually give the detail to, because once you transfer that information, that knowledge, then you can't take it back, and it can have an adverse effect, on different people in different ways. Their sort of feelings may be triggered if they have experienced things in before. There's the personal worry of family members on yourself. It can have an impact on them. So it's really about being selective and being mindful of who we're sharing different bits of information with.
It's like you say, you could trigger them because of their experiences, or there's some sort of vicarious, if they're pathetic or otherwise, they'll absorb that, that sadness and that fear. Particularly if you're bombarding the same individual with that as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that happens just in friendships generally about other things as well. If you have a problematic friend that is, always burdening you with problems, you would say that, friends should always be there for you. But you do need to be mindful about what you share, especially when we're talking about the types of things that we are.
Yeah. I think you're right. I mean, with the friendship side of things, it's, you need those friends that you can trust. Probably on one hand, if not, a couple of fingers of those you can really trust for some things. But you have to be mindful, don't you, of what you share. It's almost in conflict with itself, because we know now as society, particularly, that it's good to talk, particularly men.
Yeah.
We're getting better, particularly with generations come through, of knowing the value of saying how we're feeling, verbalising it, getting it out, because we all know what it's like when we hold it in, but it's also about being considerate, like you're saying, of who you release it to.
Yeah, I feel like we have lots of the mental health campaigns that are going on these days. The stigma is somewhat getting less. I think the stigma may still be there in some environments, and a lack of willingness to communicate, but I think we're starting to do a lot better in that regard. And for those people that aren't happy to communicate with family, friends, or people generally that they know, there is access to many different platforms where you can talk independently to people. There's hotlines set up, there's numerous charities that you and I have discussed previously that people can reach out to, without any judgment, without any fear of any judgment as well.
Yeah, right. And I'll make sure that we put some of those links to some of those organisations in the description chat as well, so 100%. I'm really glad that you working in this environment, difficulties that are there, have the self-awareness to make sure that you look after yourself and look after your mental health. It's just for the sake of you, but for your team, for family. You work in a particularly difficult environment, doing some amazing things. So on behalf of myself and everyone watching, James, thank you so much for your time, everything that you do, and stay safe.
Pleasure. Thanks very much, Tony. Cheers.
Well, that concludes this series, but what a series it has been. We've been across the world meeting some amazing people doing amazing things. We've seen the challenges they face and the psychological toll the work can take on them and their families. I want to thank them for giving us a glimpse into their lives and sharing their experiences. And I want to thank you for listening, for taking the time to sit through the things that many people don't want to hear, and perhaps understandably so. But you kept going, and I hope you keep the conversations going too. Don't stop talking about it, and stay safe. Here's what we've got coming up in Series 3.